Welcome to the October 14th regular meeting of the Board of Education. This meeting is now called to order. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. For a roll call, all members are present. And next we have the open forum. We have one speaker, Becky Madison.
Just here is good. Hi, good evening. My name is Becky Madison, and my husband Mike and I are the proud parents of 3 current Lakers. Our oldest is a freshman at Prior Lake High School. Our middle is a 6th grader at Hidden Oaks, and our youngest is a 1st grader at Hamilton Ridge. So having 3 kids in 3 school buildings means we receive a lot of emails, and it also means that we've got a really good beat about all the good things that are going on across our school district. Marnie, for the past 3 years, really thrived in middle school at Hidden Oaks, and we are very grateful as parents for the many opportunities that she had to pursue elective course offerings and try a variety of sports and activities and clubs after school. Josie spent her final 3 years of elementary school attending Sage Academy, and again, our family is beyond grateful that our district is providing such an opportunity to meet her learning needs. Ace is still pretty young, but there isn't a day that goes by that he isn't excited to get on the bus and go to Hamilton Ridge and see his teachers and friends. He adores his bus driver and also likes to stop by his kindergarten classroom to say hi to his teacher from last year. We feel very lucky to live in a school district that grants our children access to varied learning experiences, quality instruction, but most of all, caring adults who invest in the well-being of our children as much as in their academic growth. Because of these things and countless other reasons, our kids like going to school. As happy as we are about that, we also have to acknowledge that not every kid experiences school or life the same way that our children do. I've been a professional educator for the past 17 years, teaching middle school and high school science for 12 of those years, and now I'm an assistant principal at a middle school in a neighboring district. A lot has changed in education in the past 17 years, but perhaps most remarkably, from my perspective, is the growing dependency of our communities on our local public schools to be able to provide any and all types of services, resources, and support, in addition to teaching and learning, to meet the ever-growing needs of our children in our communities. Our school leaders, teachers, and support staff are diligently working to meet these demands, often without enough financial or human resources to do so with fidelity. On a daily basis, they are putting their all into meeting these impossible expectations because we're talking about kids. We are caring for kids, and I know this to be true because I live this experience every single day. Perhaps in a fairy tale land, kids would all show up to school happy and healthy and well-rested and well-fed. They would have clean clothes and shoes that fit. They would come to school ready to learn with their basic needs already being met. But we do not live in a fairy tale. Our reality is that many of our kids come to school facing real-world adversity. Some need food and clothing and rest, and they come to school to get it. Some need mental health support, special education services, and/or behavioral support. Some are caring for their siblings while their parents hold down multiple jobs, and some are working to help financially support their own families. Some are new to the country and are just beginning to learn English and acclimate to life in Minnesota. Some are medically fragile and require 24-hour health care services, which are delivered by our public schools. Some of these kids are gifted learners, gifted artists, and gifted athletes, and this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to describing the kids that walk through our doors every day. The real miracle of it all is that any combination of these individual circumstances show up together in one classroom, all at the same time, and our teachers continue to rise up to meet their calling. They not only know our kids by name, but they know them as people. They invest in them as our future and give and give and give of themselves to be emotionally available, patient with behaviors, encouraging with content, supportive of extracurriculars. The list goes on and on. I came here tonight to say thank you, because you probably don't hear that enough. Thank you to the bus drivers, custodians, nutrition services, office and clerical staff, coaches, advisors, teachers, specialists, school administrators, counselors, psychologists, social workers, and district leadership. Thank you for continuing to do all that you can to meet the needs of the children of Prior Lake and Savage. And just as you show up for our kids in a million different ways every day, it is my hope that our communities will show up for our kids on Election Day and pass this levy. Please vote yes to support our students on Election Day. As educators, we don't just advocate for some kids or my kids because they are all our kids, and it takes a village to raise them. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I need a motion and a second.
So made.
By Director Olstad,
Second.
second by Director Crosby. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a board member or citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed as a consent agenda item and addressed. The removal of an item for discussion must be requested prior to the approval of the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of financials, which is the check and wire transfer disbursement summary, the wire transfer EFT and ACH banking activity, the bank reconciliation statements, PMA financial, monthly wire detail, monthly health and dental wire detail, monthly check detail, monthly ACH detail, purchase orders above $25,000, monthly financial report, approval of the school board minutes, personnel items, including candidates for employment, resignations, terminations, non-renewals, district retirements, leaves of absences.
Chair France, I'd like to pull 2 items from the consent agenda
Okay,
for further discussion. The September check detail or check register.
is that
So that
A7?
is 7,
A7?
7A7, please. And also purchase orders above 25,000, please, for 7B.
Okay, those items will be moved to new business. Anybody else? Okay, asking for a motion. I already got a first and a second, so I'm asking for a vote on the consent agenda with all items except A7, and B, all of B, purchase orders above 25,000.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, motion and a second.
Second.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 6-0. All right, next item on the agenda is the resolution for acceptance of gifts. Tonight, we have 3 items. We have a $1,400 gift from Mark and Dana Neiman for blinds for room B206 at Hamilton Ridge Elementary. We have $1,000 from the Prior Lake Savage Optimist Club for the community Halloween party. We have school supplies from Health Source of Prior Lake for all of Prior Lake Savage area students. So I need a motion and a second
So made.
by Director Olstad and second by Director Bullion. This is a roll call vote. Director Olstad,
Aye.
Director Crosby,
Aye.
Director Burnick,
Aye.
Director Bullion,
Aye.
Director Atkinson,
Aye.
and I. So that passes 6-0. Okay. Next on our item is Laker Pride. So I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair France. Tonight, we have our team focusing on one aspect of our new strategic plan, specifically that around how we are optimizing resources. And as we do each month, just sharing some of our practices that are aligning to our plan and how it's we're actually breathing life into this in our daily practice. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director of Business Services and team.
Thank you, Chair Franz, Dr. Thomas, members of the board, community. We're going to talk about today one of the ways that we optimize our resources around enrollment and staffing. So the first kind of step that we have to do for enrollment is, as parents come in kindergarten, they register for their child for the kindergarten classrooms. And then what we end up doing is looking at where their district school is, when their boundaries, and assign them to that school. Then we look at all of the current students in 1st through 11th grade. We ask the IT department to just kind of roll over all of the records so that all the 1st graders at, for instance, Hamilton Ridge become 2nd graders at Hamilton Ridge, and so forth. They'll just advance 1 grade at the same site. Then when we do that, we look at our open enrolled students and determine, we've made a commitment to having them receive their 1st, 2nd, or possibly 3rd choice for open enrolled students. So we'll place them where we can, again, looking at the total enrollments at the sites. So as we kind of get all of the students where their boundary schools are, where their open enrollment choices are, then we start looking at if there's any exceptions we need to make, if there's requests for different sites, just kind of doing our adjusting for the manual requests that come through, and then come up with kind of a preliminary kind of plan on what each of the classrooms would possibly look like as we move forward.
High school members of the board, the next step in this is looking at the staffing. So we pull all of our reports for the current year and roll them forward, looking at the tenured FTE that we have in the system, and then the probationary FTE we have in the system as well, aligned with licensure requirements. At the elementary school, we typically have all of our licensures covering areas, but we do have licensures that are 1st through 6th grade, so we have to monitor those as well for the kindergarten exception. But secondary is where that really comes into play, making sure that licensure is aligned with FTE, with the student enrollment and needs, and tracking the enrollment with our FTE on a weekly basis as we move forward to the staffing season. And then the partnership that we have with Dr. Edwards and the principals to really move those two pieces together between our current FTE and our projected enrollment. So I'll have them speak to that.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. Want to talk a little bit, the information that we've shared up to this point gets us back again, Tammy mentioned, beginning in January, and now we're in the April to May timeframe of preparing for an upcoming school year, and that time is really fine-tuning our registration numbers that typically come forward in February and into March at the secondary level, and again, continuing to watch throughout the spring and into the early summer months where things are lining up in terms of our enrollment at each of our respective elementary buildings, and working with the principal and leadership at each of our sites to see where our staffing needs presently are, and that can shift throughout those times from May until early August, and we continued and start to meet actually on a weekly basis even throughout the summer months, with particularly at the elementary level, with all of our principals, myself, Executive Director Frederickson, Executive Director Herman, looking at anything that's changing as the summer months come with enrollment. We are central enrollment process as a district, so families might come to the district service center, and we continue to accept open enrollments, et cetera, throughout those months. And this past school year, in preparation for our current school year, we did a number of adjustments in the month of late July, early August timeframe, as we were seeing some changes from our original documentation that we had prepared in April, May timeframe, and worked in collaboration with our principals around that. And that's why we have Mr. Frederickson here to speak on behalf of the elementary principal colleagues with regard to some of the adjustments that we made throughout August and even to early September.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Thank you, Chair Franz and Superintendent Thomas and the rest of the board. I appreciate being here. Through all that complication with enrollment numbers and looking at staffing pieces, I'll say I wish I knew in April what I will know in August, because it's a moving target as we go along. As you may recall, the last time we went through the budget, we actually reserved money for growth. And then we were watching the weekly meetings that Dr. Edwards referred to, looking at what are those target numbers we have for each grade level in each building, and what are those discussion caps, where we're looking at, do we need to have another section at that building? And after a while, it's like, well, are we ready to do this yet? Because we know once we make that decision, that will determine what the next decision is. So we did earlier in the summer hire a couple more positions because a few of our sections grew to quite significantly above the discussion cap. Then when we got to this fall, we realized that that budgeted amount was shrinking, and we found that kindergarten enrollment had gotten higher at multiple buildings above that discussion cap. And some of those happened earlier, some of those happened later, and it got to the point where hiring another kindergarten teacher, first of all, would have been very disruptive to the system because we'd already had some assignments of students, and also there wasn't quite the budget left to do that. So we moved on to having student support paraprofessionals, not just at kindergarten, but at Hamilton Ridge is at first grade. I think Jeffers Pond, it was second grade and fifth grade. And thinking about optimizing resources, how do we make our schools run with all the resources we have? And one resource we have, of course, is people, including our parent volunteers, including people we're hiring. And we had 3 positions that we weren't able to hire for. They're 2.25 hour noon supervisor positions. They're hard to fill because most people want to be able to work more than 2 hours a day. And we had 3 of those open. At the same time, we found we needed 2 student support paraprofessionals, but we only had funding for 1 more. So while we're continuing to use parent volunteers to help staff our cafeteria, to help make sure our kids have, kindergartners have someone to help open their milk, and the other kids can open the plastic pieces with an adult there, these positions weren't getting hired. So we ended up taking those 3 positions, one at Hamilton Ridge, one at Westwood, and one at Red Tail Ridge, and combined them in order to hire another student support specialist when we needed 2 and we could only afford 1. So again, thinking that we're using all these different resources and we could be a little creative in positions we couldn't fill to reassign those funds for something we actually need and could fill at all the buildings. So thank you for listening.
One of the pieces I'd like to add to that particular comment is that idea generated specifically from our elementary principals in those meetings. We had talked about, here's our dilemma. Unfortunately, this is our tight resources that we have, and they offered up that suggestion in early, I think it was the 2nd week of school, and said, we want to prioritize, this is where the greater need is, and multiple principals offered up that to support and benefit another school rather than their own. And that collaboration, again, that continued into that time frame. We just wanted to highlight that, bring that forward, that is the collaborative spirit that our across our system, our administrators have, and the teams that they support have at our sites to do, in fact, what we just talked about here in optimizing our resources.
I think we will entertain any questions you might have from any of the 4 of us.
I don't have any I guess I don't really have any questions. I think that I really appreciate the collaboration between the principals and, looking at how to optimize when positions are such as the supervisor positions are hard to fill, and how can we use those resources to best help our students. I really appreciate learning more about that, so thank you for sharing.
It gives context to our agenda item that we'll talk about later tonight around class size, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, well, I appreciate learning about the entire life cycle and how early it starts, the unpredictability, the adjustments, and the teamwork. It's very interesting to know, and understanding that being able to project and plan ahead isn't always possible, and the ability to adapt on the fly is done so smoothly to the point where none of us know any better, and I'm sure neither the families. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have personnel items, and I don't have anything on the agenda. There's nothing there? Okay, we're going to go into no unfinished business and go into new business, and we're going to start with the items that were pulled off of the consent agenda. The first one is 7A7, which is the check and wire transfer.
Can I ask really quickly, sorry to interrupt, under personnel items, we have 2 retirements. I just want to acknowledge early in the meeting.
We do. We
so-
were going to do that during our board reports, but you're right. We do have 2 retirements. Would you like to do that now?
You can wait if you want.
Okay.
I just didn't know, sorry.
I mean, we can wait till the end of
Yeah,
our.
we do it during board
Thank you.
reports, but thank you. And on to the items off of the consent agenda, starting with the 7A7.
Thank you. I have a question on the September check detail. There was a check to Spiker & Co. on September 11th for $61,817. I believe it's an insurance policy for board directors. And my question is, I have a couple questions surrounding this. Why was this not on the purchase orders over $25,000? I looked back and I didn't see it on the list.
It actually was, we put it on there, it was the entire policy. It was like a $900,000 that we had for Spiker. There's 5 different portions of that policy, and we just listed them on the PO over 25,000 as one item number. So it was, I'll have to double check which month it was in.
So last month, it was listed as EMC, and I think that's why I was confused, because I didn't see the name Spiker. So it was EMC, and it was general liability insurance
Right,
is what
so
it was?
Spiker is our broker.
Right.
So the EMC is the insurance company. It's all the same payments.
Okay.
And I can certainly break down I think there's 4 components to the insurance that we pay to Spiker. I can get those to you.
No, that's okay, as long as it was included, that's fine. And then, I know I asked this question, I'm assuming, like, do you do comparisons with other brokers on this? And like, how long have we used the same company?
So we just did an RFP this past summer. I think we provided all that information to the board. I think it was in the spring, or summer. We did an RFP and Spiker was chosen. I think we've been doing business with them probably for the last 10 years, before my time here. But we did have an RFP. I think there was 3 responses, and we chose Spiker.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. My second question is about the purchase orders over $25,000. For the purchase of Abre for the Portrait of a Graduate software for $43,500, is this new this year?
Director Atkinson, this is actually a software technology. It's not just unique to the profile of a learner. We are looking at morphing into Abre as a comprehensive data warehouse and visualization tool and sunsetting some other contracts. We're in this transitionary period. We can actually save resources by utilizing their company. So there's actually 3 builds that we're doing with them. The first will be around how we have data visualizations across the board for elements aligned to our strategic plan, so they'll be able to build in metrics of how we actually execute that. Secondly, we're going to be putting together what's called a Student 360 profile, which is an online dashboard accessible for our staff that will house all of our FastBridge, ELA, Math, SABRS, MCA, ACT, all the data points for our kids. And then the third is building out a more robust behavior analytics tool so that we can warehouse and track and monitor intervention supports of all the discipline and behavior infractions. And then at the end of this year, there's a couple of softwares that we'll be sunsetting after that contract expires, and then saving resources by bundling into Abre. So we're in that transition period right now. And that's being supported through our A&I grant.
Correct, yeah, okay. And is this, when I looked at this, it has to do with the whole child? Is that correct? The Aubrey, the Portrait of a Learner,
The whole,
the whole child?
that's a data point.
Right, and then it
It's
aligns
like the
with,
core, it's like our strategic core beliefs in our strat plan. At the high school level, we worked with a lot of our students to develop the attributes of a learner So a lot of the, collaboration, critical thinking, those skill sets, there's like 7 of those that were developed, and then we'll be able to track and monitor against students being able to demonstrate that these are aspects of their learning as well.
okay. That's, yeah, and I saw it also aligns with the Castle model. So before I had heard that we weren't using Castle, so I was.
We're not using Castle.
Okay,
Aubrey is an IT solution. It has nothing to do with anything other than warehousing data and allowing staff to take action with the data that it collects, and it develops dashboards and visualizations so I can see where every student is performing on a variety of different metrics. So that's Aubrey. Castle as an SEL company, that's not part of Aubrey.
well, it was listed on their website, so that's why I wanted to ask about it.
2 different companies.
Is the data all internal then?
data
Internal,
is
it's not
all-
shared with anybody, or?
It's all internal. This is our internal data dashboard that we currently have with EduClimber and things of that nature. And so we're looking at exploring ways that we can optimize our resources so that we can save dollars and become more efficient in how we can be also more responsive to our kids' needs.
Okay, and one last question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because I know we had talked about, the teachers are mostly going to be using their time for the READ Act. So how will this platform be utilized, and who will be utilizing it?
Very similar to how teachers are using other platforms currently, except expanded and enhanced efficiencies for the user, as well as bottom line cost savings for the district.
That's all the questions I have, thank you.
Okay. I need a motion and a second
So made?
by Director Crosby. Second by Director Burnick. So for the vote for the consent agenda items 7A7 and 7B, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that passes 5-1. All right, moving on to the final audit presentation, and I'm going to hand this over to Director Frederickson.
Thank you. We have with us here tonight, representing our audit firm, MMKR, Jim Eichten, and we welcome him, and he's going to go through his presentation. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Tammy. Members of the board, superintendent, my name is Jim Eichten. I'm with MMKR CPAs, the auditor for the district. I'm here this evening to provide a presentation for the audit report for the year ended June 30th, 2024. The role of the auditor is to provide an opinion on the district's financial statements. You are required to complete an annual financial statement and submit those financial statements to a variety of governmental agencies, including the Office of the State Auditor, the Minnesota Department of Education, as well as the federal government related to the federal awards you receive. As part of the audit process, this process is guided by standards. It requires us to audit your internal controls, specifically related to financial reporting. We also audit your compliance with a variety of laws and regulations, specifically related to the aids and grants that you receive. We're also, as part of the audit process, auditing your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. The district does receive significant federal awards, and as a result, you are required to follow the standards of the federal agencies that provide those grants. That particular set of auditing standards are guided again by the federal government, which also requires us to audit your internal controls specifically to those grants that we complete, as well as your compliance with requirements of various major programs depending on the year and the audit cycle that we're going through. I do want to point out that the district's financial statements also are issued in what's called an annual comprehensive financial report, which goes above and beyond the actual requirements of a financial statement. These are submitted for achievement in excellence in financial reporting. So you should be commended for taking that on as an additional added component of your financial statements. As part of the audit process, I issue what's called the management report. The management report is a report that is can be read so that you can understand the financial results and the audit results in a more condensed format without having to look at the larger documents. In that management report, I'm going to cover the highlights tonight and provide you with some audit results. I believe as part of the audit packet that you did receive all of the documentation, the audit information. Please recognize that these documents are in draft form. As we stand here tonight, I will call it the quality review process is ongoing. That includes the audit review process at the staff level internally, but also in my level as well in my office, and going through quality review and making sure all of the reports are accurate and in good form. So, as a board, if you do recognize something as you go through in detail, please forward that on to Tammy. She can forward it on to me, and I can get any corrections that you see in place. So that being said, the district did receive an unmodified opinion on that basic financial statements. It was a clean opinion. Unmodified is the technical term, but it is a clean opinion for all intents and purposes. We were able to issue that opinion this year, as I have for multiple years. As I mentioned, the internal controls of the district are good form. We did not have any findings to report specifically to internal controls over financial reporting activities. Continuing on the reports, I failed to mention that we also are required to audit your compliance with Minnesota laws and regulations. The Office of the State Auditor here in the state provides us with a list of the laws that we audit. We don't audit every law, just the ones that on their list. The audit results in that particular area did come up with one finding specifically related to unclaimed property. The district is required to submit an unclaimed property report to the state on an annual basis, basically providing them with a list of property that you might have had that were unclaimed. Probably the best example is an outstanding check, somebody that didn't, cash a check. So we did deem, noted that particular report was not filed, but actually in this case, the file, if it were to have been filed, it would have stated there were no unclaimed property. So it was more of we didn't file the report, but it is required to actually file a report even though you don't have any unclaimed property. The second the second finding that we had this year related to procurement standards within the single audit of federal awards. In a single audit in a federal framework, you are required to determine if any vendor that you have working in that space is suspended or debarred from receiving federal funds. The federal government issues a list of vendors that are suspended or debarred, and it is a requirement of the district that any spending that goes through that particular federal grants is to validate that they weren't suspended or debarred. That particular internal control findings is very specific in that it relates to the internal controls. And why I say that is the controls here were deemed to be insufficient in that the district was really just looking at that list once a year, and you should be doing it as well every time a vendor is added to your system to make sure you're not adding a vendor and then paying them the next day. Importantly, it's also important to recognize that we do test for compliance in this area, and the district did comply with that standard. This particular finding relates to the controls and not the compliance. Very important distinction. So I'll continue on. In my management report, I do also then provide information on the financial results for the year. That particular management report starts with this particular graph. This shows the district's unrestricted fund balance over the last 10 years compared to the statewide fund balances collectively of our state. Remember that this particular percentage being used here is the Minnesota Department of Education's percentage. The district has its own internal calculation that differs from this particular calculation. And you can see here that statewide, actually, fund balances were pretty consistent, almost 20% as a percentage of operations for quite some time, going all the way back to 15, all the way through 2019. When the pandemic hit, actually, fund balances started to go up as spending went down during the pandemic phase, as well as some federal money that was provided to districts was increasing those fund balances. As we get post-pandemic and those federal dollars start to dwindle, we're seeing statewide fund balances declining. Enrollment has been declining as well, kind of statewide. The blue graph is the district's graph, and you can see over the last few years, the district's fund balance has declined, and at the end of the year, you're at 10%. And I'll go through some of the individual data as it relates to your calculations here in a bit. So this graph is also in my management report, and it shows revenues on a per-student basis compared to both the statewide comparisons as well as the metropolitan area. So what this graph is telling you is in 2024, the revenues of the district were $17,292 per student. And you can look at that particular graph and break it down by the various components of revenues that you're receiving. The first thing that stands out to me is really that total compared to the statewide and metro area averages are quite a bit lower. You can see in 2023, the district received $16,200 per student, when on average the metro area was $19,600, statewide it was $18,600. And you might ask, well, why is that? Well, you really have to look at the very first line. Property taxes, which is really generated through formulas of the state, but the district is receiving less property taxes than other comparable entities, and that is driving the lower than average revenues at the district level. Some of the things that stand out to me in that particular graph shows the increases in some of the state funding. The state did provide additional revenues on the general education aid, as well as the district received additional special education dollars this year, which is really showing up on that state line in the general fund. You're also seeing in the special revenue funds, the food service revenues increasing, again, going back to some additional state revenues for meals provided this past year. Lastly, I'll point out the federal line. You can see the federal line is declining. And again, as those pandemic-related funding is dwindling, you're seeing that federal revenue go down in 2024. So how does that correlate to the operations of the district? Well, this graph shows expenditures on a per-student basis. And as you might expect, when revenues are less than average, expenditures are less than average. In general, they correlate. So in 2024, the district spent $17,535 per student, when on average the state was about $18,700, $19,600 at the metro area. Those particular numbers really correlate, like I said, to each other, and generally when you look at this graph, if they don't, you end up in challenging times as you're spending more than you're getting on the revenue side. Some of the areas that stand out to me in this particular graph stand out in the areas of additional expenditures in the general fund. You can see that the district had additional expenditures in both regular instruction and special education instruction. Most or all of that is in salaries and benefits. Additional teachers as well, or additional personnel, can't just say teachers, were also added into these particular categories. The district is also seeing additional costs in both regular transportation and special education transportation, which is showing up in the pupil support services category. So continuing on, in my report, we do go into each individual fund. There's some trend lines and data on individual funds. This particular graph shows the general fund financial position. Financial position in an audit like this is really indication in two ways: the cash and investments, as well as the fund balance at the end of the year. That is widely used to evaluate where you stand from an equity position in your general fund. And the next graph actually gets into a little more detail, but I'm going to focus on this one right now. You can see at the end of the year, the district ended the year with a fund balance decline of almost $4.3 million. Revenues or expenditures were higher than revenues by that $4.3 million. The budget of the district anticipated a fund balance decline of about $1.5 million. So you're almost $3 million more decline in fund balance than what was budgeted originally. Revenues were higher than budget by almost $4 million. Expenditures were higher than budget by about $7 million, offsetting each other. What does that mean in terms of policy? This particular graph shows the general fund's financial position by category. There are a number of funding elements to the state's funding system, and it includes restricted balances, money that comes to the district that are restricted for various purposes, which can be seen on the second line. That did increase. Probably the biggest piece there is some monies that are going to be used for basic skills. And then you have amounts that are assigned internally for various categories, things that carry over from one year to year, assigned for particular purposes. The district does have a fund balance policy, and this particular policy states that the district is to maintain a fund balance minimum of total fund balance of between 8 to 12% of the annual budget. When you look at that particular graph at the bottom, we do include those particular percentages, which the percentage here that you should focus on is the 8.9% right below that graph. That is the percentage that correlates back to your fund balance policy. So you are within the fund balance policy range of 8 to 12%, but after being pretty much above that particular percentage for the last 4 years, you're kind of in the range, but at the low end of that particular range. So as I mentioned, this is a graph. You can see here, these are the various fund balance components. This is getting into a lot of detail. I'm not going to cover this significantly, but you do have various fund balances that are going to be used for various categories, including literacy incentive, American Indian Education Aid, basic skills, a variety of things that are carrying over specifically because they weren't spent in the previous fiscal year. So this graph does show the general fund revenues, and I really put these here to really show some of the trends, some of the things that are happening at the individual level. The total general fund revenues did increase by about $7 million in 2024. Revenue increases, again, were mainly in state aid for both general education as well as special education. I mentioned the decline in federal dollars happening, and you can see that on that particular graph. As you can see here on this particular graph, the general fund budget was over budget by almost $4 million, as mentioned earlier. Categorically, other revenues were significantly over budget, mostly because of conservative budgeting in certain areas. You just don't know what you're going to get in certain categories. That was below budget. Interest earnings were above expectations. Again, you don't know what your interest earnings are going to be just based on market. And lastly, state aid was higher than expected, mostly in special education. And again, special education dollars are generated by cost. So because the costs were higher, the revenues were higher. So on the expenditure side, you can see here that the various categories, certainly salaries and benefits are the majority of the spending at a school district. Total general fund expenditures increased by almost $8 million, $7.8 million from the previous year, 4.5 in salaries, 2.3 million in benefits. Again, most of the increases were in those special education, in the salary and benefit areas. Some of the increases that you're seeing mostly relate to contract improvements, increases in benefits, increase in staffing levels. There was quite a bit of an increase in staffing. Substitutes is becoming more and more costly around the metropolitan area, as well as transportation that I previously mentioned. So I'll continue on. We do also in the report show other governmental funds. And, you can see here that you have the district has a food service special revenue fund that has a fund balance of almost 2.9 million. It did increase from the previous year, as well as the community service special revenue fund. I look at that graph and see great improvements in that particular graph or particular presentation. That yellow line, or the yellow kind of what the year was at, 2021 was a year that I remember standing here going, that's a low point for the district, and certainly seen some very great improvements in fund balance and equity in that particular fund since that time. The financial report does include a lot of other information. There is a district-wide presentation. This particular presentation takes all of the financial data of the district and puts it into one particular financial statement presentation. Why I put this up here, because it does show that from one year to the next, the overall financial results of the district improved by almost $10 million in that particular presentation. So certainly that can stand out in terms of overall financial picture of the district. So that's the end of my presentation. So in summary, I was able to issue a clean opinion on the basic financial statements of the district. You did issue or will be issuing an annual comprehensive financial report, which is exceptional. I had the two findings, which again were mostly control related and not compliance related. I reported the various individual financial results of the various entities. And the last thing I just want to point out that this is one of my first audits that we issue. My firm issues quite a few audits, and with the comment there about the district's finance department providing timely and thorough information, this audit goes very smoothly, and I'm glad to report at this time very positive results, both from the audit perspective, but also just the audit efficiency perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for any questions that you might have for me.
Are there any questions on the audit?
I have a question about the slide with the fund balance. I apologize, I don't have it. I don't think we received this, so.
This one?
No, it's the one where you showed the percentage of 8%.
Oh, this one?
So my question is, on that one, is our policy states unrestricted and restricted added together.
Yes.
So the number, are you referring to 8.9 as being both unrestricted and restricted?
Correct.
You are,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
And does that include the food funds and like because then you went back a couple more slides and you talked about how those have improved, which I know that I've seen that
Yep.
from the numbers. So is that included in here as well?
The fund balance policy of the district does not include those two funds. It just includes the general fund. So
the general
that
fund.
percentage is just the general fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I just had a general question about, we've seen the substitute teacher increase quite a bit, the cost increase. It was kind of a bidding war for a while between various school districts. The other thing was, so I'm basically, my first question about substitute teachers was when you made that statement with regards to overall salaries and benefits and cost of employees, so that was included in there? That wasn't part of purchase services?
Substitutes are part of purchase services.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
So when you look at this particular, let's see, let me get to it. This graph, the purchase services is where the substitutes are landing, and you can see the actual costs there being above both last year and expectation. There's other things in there like transportation, but substitutes are definitely in that category.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because you had made that comment at the same time as the other ones, and that's what I thought. The other thing is inflation rates. I know that this is the first audit that you've completed, but we have seen inflation on goods and services go up significantly in the past 3 or 4 years. did you look at the percentage of inflation as, in relation to our expenditures? So same product, price is higher, that sort of thing, was that broken down anywhere?
Yeah, so that's a great question regarding how we treat inflation in an audit like this. As part of my audit process, we, in June, if you will, sit down as a firm, as a team, and determine our expectations, our benchmarks. Those benchmarks are built into our audit process. So anytime our auditors, if you will, are out in the field and they see a particular cost, and they look at the benchmarks that we're putting together based on inflation, and that, if that number says 4% and the district is experiencing 10%, we tend to pull data. We tend to pull invoices, we tend to pull other information that says, well, this seems odd, why is it 10%? Just to validate, that, yeah, there's nothing unusual there. We didn't dive into it any further than that, but we do some testing specifically to benchmarks based on inflation.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No, first of all, thank you very, very much for
Thank you.
the thorough report. The next step for the board is to vote on the draft, and assuming no other substantive changes, they're just quality control with spell checks, sentence structure, et cetera.
Yes.
Qualify? Okay. So I'd like to take a motion on the budget report
So made?
by Director Crosby,
Second.
second by Director Olsted. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 6-0. And next on our agenda is the district enrollment report, and I'm going to hand this over to Director Frederickson. No board action is requested. It's informational only.
Thank you, Chair Franz. You can see we have updated the monthly report that I have been giving you for the last couple years. We've added the October 1st count. Just keep in mind that while October 1st has passed, we still have time to get any students that were registered on October 1st, that we can still get the free and reduced lunch forms or the additional educational comprehensive report done. We have until actually December, because it goes on the Mars report. But these are kind of the unofficial, official October 1st counts. We've got 40 more students than what we ended the year in June with. We still are about 100 students more than what we're projecting, which is great. The majority of them are in kindergarten. But you can see we're at 552 kindergarten students, which is less than the 575 that we ended the year with, but it's more than what we were anticipating. So we'll continue to watch that. And again, we'll come back to the board in December. If these numbers hold, we can look at doing a budget amendment. But right now, we're kind of sitting pretty good with our kindergarten classrooms.
Are there any questions? Tammy, I had one question, and just to clarify, because I did get some questions in from people when they were comparing just first grade this year to first grade last year, and I mentioned that you really need to take kindergarten from 2022 to first grade of 2023 to second grade to show the progression. And it does look like really only one grade level did we actually drop, and I think that was expected. So it looks really good. So thank you for all this hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment, just that I appreciated the, and going over the numbers, I appreciated the conservative enrollment projections. And it's really promising to see what the numbers actually are.
With no other questions or comments, move on also to the 5-year forecasting model, and this is also informational only.
Thank you. So we have completed the why can't I get this? The 5-year forecast. I guess one of the things that I just want to remind you is that this is a projection model that shows what 5 years out could look like with no structural changes. This is not a budget. This is not an actual what we're going to look like in 5 years. This is making some assumptions, which we've defined in this document, and assuming that if all of those assumptions were to come true, which we know is probably not going to happen, that this was what could possibly look like in 5 years. I've done 3 different scenarios. I've done one that looks at the actual, if we would end the referendum. I did one with assuming we got the referendum, and then I did one assuming that we renewed the referendum. Again, it's not intended to be a budget, just kind of playing this out. Some of those assumptions we're making, we've listed the assumptions that we've made in enrollment, and keeping in mind that we are, as we've talked about before, an aging state. We're not getting a lot of new births, so we're not anticipating having a lot of new kids coming into the district. Again, this is an assumption based on the historical data that we have. We're still showing declines of less than 1% or less than 5% or 0.5% in some cases, but again, we are showing some decline. We're assuming that the state formula will increase 2%. I know the legislation has a cap on it based on inflation of 3%. I did a conservative estimate and used 2% because that's what it's been for the last several years. If it's 3%, then it'll change some of these, slightly change some of these assumptions. I'm assuming the same number of free and reduced lunch students. I'm assuming the same number of English learners. The one thing that you need to also keep in mind is that this spring is a legislative funding year. And we know what happened 2 years ago. We got a lot of additional revenue with a lot of additional mandates. I don't really anticipate that happening again, but who knows? I mean, this is making some assumptions. The expenses, I'm assuming a 2.5% increase on all wages and all the wage scales. Health insurance increased this year by 4%. We're assuming a 5% increase moving forward on our health insurance. Again, that may or may not happen, depending on, but it is probably a likely scenario. So our projection is taking those assumptions, looking at what we anticipate having starting the year next year, and you can see that assuming all of these things, looking at our current year, that we are, if nothing changes and we take the assumptions that we have built into this, that we will be looking at about $3.7 to $4 million decrease that we're going to have to make for next year. And that's assuming that we wouldn't get a voter-approved levy done. You can see as we carry it out that as that levy ends, it will change some of those numbers. I've also done, again, a projection that if we just renewed the levy, what those numbers would look like, and then I also did assuming that there was an increase. I also did some additional projections in kind of Appendix 2. And then I've done a projection revenue, again, in Appendix 3A, what it would look like without a new levy, what it would look like with the new levy, and then what it would look like with just an expired levy. And I've broken down all of the components of the revenue, so you can see all of the different property taxes, all the state aid, the special education aid, and then some of our other revenue. So basically, that's how we put together this 5-year forecast. And take any questions?
I have kind of a detailed question, sorry.
Oh, I like your detailed first.
And then we can move forward. In terms of compensatory aid, what does that change look like when it's tied to the general fund? Have they explained how they're doing that to us yet?
No, they're still talking about it. Right now, they're assuming that the next year, and possibly the year after, they're just keeping it status quo. They're just saying whatever you have now, you're gonna get
You get.
until they figure out how that formula would change if they do tie it to.
I mean, it's not a huge funding bucket, but it matters. Thank you.
I just had a comment as I studied these projections, which I appreciate very much. The one area that I think is pretty easy for everybody to look at from just over like a high level is when you look at the total expenditures, 24, 25, but let's just say it's 122 million. And then you look ahead at 29 to 30, and those expenditures go up to 138 million, 138.7. Simple math shows me that's like a $16 million increase, and then my mind goes right to which buckets are my largest categories. And you can see pretty quickly that line 3, elementary and secondary regular instruction, goes from 56.9 to 66 million, which is staff, right? 83% of our budget. And then you just kind of break down, and you can get pretty quickly to that $16 million swing. I mean, I'm off a little bit, but, I mean, no matter how you decide what your revenue looks like, if you can pay attention to your expenditures and say, where is that money going? I see pretty quickly that it's to people and salaries and benefits, so.
Again, I'm assuming that there'll be a salary increase every year. That's just one of the assumptions that I made.
Yeah, and then it breaks out administration separately, which is good to see too, right? Because then we can think about, are we too heavy on the administration side versus, and you just start paying attention to it. Sites and buildings goes from 10 million to 9.7. So I think that's a pretty good, it's just an area that I would encourage the community to take a peek at, and all of the other board members, and say, well, your look at this is pretty conservative, and unless we don't have people.
And in my mind, the other two large buckets are special ed and instructional support, which both are, serving students with people and needs that many of which are mandated. So that gets us quickly to
I could get to
14 million,
Well, 10 and then 3 plus
plus one,
two
plus two.
sports, yeah. It gets it, I mean, again, I'm not trying to lose $1 million here and there, but it's pretty easy to start looking at where this is coming from. And it's a good thing, but people cost money, and that's our largest output is salaries and benefits.
I have a question. So I've been tracking, and I appreciate the 5-year forecast, but I went back and I looked at the one that we did a year ago, October 30th of 2023. And what I'm trying to wrap my arms around is that when I looked at that forecast, which basically says the current referendum ends in 29, at that point, the way it was forecasted, we had a positive fund balance all the way up until 29. And so I understand, I've done a lot of financial forecasting in my life, and you basically, I understand you use your best guess. It's really your best guess at the moment in time based on the information that you have available to you. And so as a board director, I'm sitting here trying to understand, what new data did you have that, your revenue is, I want to say, somewhat staying flat, but then your expenses are dramatically increasing over where it was forecasted. And I think you'd have to have this in front of you to really, I didn't dollar it out by each year. But I'm just trying to understand, from what you knew last year to what you know this year, what's driving this? And, maybe it goes back to I understand what you said about people, and I know we hired 63 new positions last year. So with declining enrollment or stagnant enrollment, would we continue to hire 63 new people every year if we are not having the enrollment to demand it? And so I get the comment about people, but would we in fact continue to hire that many people going forward if we don't have the enrollment to justify it, to justify the need?
So this forecast would be not assuming we're adding. All this forecast is doing is taking the actuals, and from 23 to 26, I mean, there's 2 more years of data that we would have looked at. We got, the budget for 24, 25 was different than it was when we did that forecast a year ago. We're looking at actual numbers. We've settled contracts now, so we have actual amounts that we're paying people. I think when we did the original one, we were still in negotiations with some of the collective bargaining agreements. We know what those are now, so we're assuming that. So I'm not assuming that we're adding positions. I'm taking exactly what we have now, adding a 2.5% increase in salaries and just moving it forward. I'm not assuming that we're going to be adding anything. It's just a straight, if we do the math, it's just a straight 2.5% increase on those. And then the fringe benefits, assuming, a 5% increase on the health insurance.
And so like, the other question I had when I looked at this is, I mean, pretty shocking that we're over $7 million over our budget. And I, as a board member, I'm, I guess, concerned at what point in the budget process are board members made aware that we are going to be $7 million over. And when I looked at this, I don't see it as being $7 million over budget, because we cut $4 million in expenses, correct? So that means we're at 11 million over. And then you go into the fund balance where we took $2 million out of fund balance. So we're really $13 million over in expenses. Is that correct?
No, you have to offset that with the amount over in our revenue. Because when the special education increases in our salary, we get revenue based on what we spend in special education. There's a formula of what you get. So while Mr. Eichten was explaining our expenses were up 7%, but or 7 million, our revenue was 4 million more. So you have to net those. And you have grants that we only spend what the revenue is. So if we get a new grant and have additional increases in that revenue, then we're going to spend those expenses. So it's commensurate with the amount of revenue that you have. You have to net those two.
Right, no, I understand. And again, happy to see the extra 4 million in revenue, but like, how confident are we with this projection that we're looking at not a super conservative approach to enrollment, which would drive down the revenue, and a super conservative approach to revenue, but then we're being aggressive with our expenses. And that's going to have a major swing and a major impact on how the total forecasts out. And that's when I look at it from a big picture. I look at the one we did in October 30th to one we did now, and that's the biggest, the difference I see, just looking at it from that way. It almost looks like we're looking at a very conservative approach on the revenue, but aggressive approach on the spending, which then would mean we need to dial back our spending, so.
I guess you could make that argument, but the expenses that we've looked at historical data. And if the expenses are going to increase, for instance, we know that our bus contract is going to go up 8% next year. This year it was up 6%. So we already know that. We're making some assumptions. Our utilities went up 8 to 10% this year. Is it going to go down next year? Probably not. So I don't feel like we're making aggressive estimates of our expenditures based on the historical spending that we've had year over year. I mean, we could argue that maybe some of these assumptions are not necessarily correct, but again, I'm taking actual numbers and increasing it by, in some case, other than the contracts that we know, like transportation, which is going up 8%, we already know that. I'm using a conservative 2%, which I think if you look in our own personal lives, 2% increase in some of these expenses is not necessarily an aggressive increase.
Yeah, no, I
Could
appreciate
certainly
that.
argue it and say these assumptions maybe should be different, but based on the historical data that I've seen over the last 10 years, the increases that I have built into this forecast, I think, are reasonable.
I think the only reason I question it is when I look at the historically where we landed from a budget from the past 10 years, from revenue to expenses, we didn't see these big jumps in the past, especially with expenses. It seemed like it happened in the last 2 years where our expenses have just skyrocketed and our revenue, to be honest with you. So that's where I'm trying to just literally trying to wrap my arms around, like, why all of a sudden are we in a position where it looks like, I mean, the forecast does not look good, right? So why is that? Is it, I mean, that's, I guess I can make my own assumptions on that, but just my own perception of what I'm
Yeah,
seeing, so.
my perception's different. I think you've walked this walk with us and taught us a lot along the way about what you're doing and how you all as an administrative leadership team are looking at things and the challenges you're faced with. The one thing I want to touch on is that when we talk about number of hires, I think that number is not super helpful in this conversation because I feel like, as the example was tonight, there were 3 open para positions and instead we hired, lunchroom supervisor positions, and instead we hired 1. So number of hires is not, context matters around all of that. It matters around this whole conversation, but I'm not gonna throw out a number of hires and think that number is gonna impact, the way I think about a district. And also, again, this is such a state issue, and I appreciate what the state has done around this, but there's a lot more work to be done around the special ed cross-subsidy, and many of our hires have been around that. And that need is growing, and if you talk to early childhood specialists who are screening kids, I think they thought post-COVID that would change, and it's not changing. And so while we may not know the why, or we all have different reasons why, this is our reality. This is where we are. And so that drives increased costs as well. So I just wanted to speak to that.
And if I were to just make a comment on how you have forecasted for expenses, taking that data, I think it would, is it fair to say, maybe I should pose this more as a question for clarification. Is it fair to say that if you were to forecast maybe less generously for future expenses, while that might look different on the forecast, it would cause more trouble given if expenses were as high as past rises indicated. When you share that you're assuming, where did I write it? When you were sharing your assumptions, you assumed a formula increase of 2%, is this correct?
Correct.
Assuming the same number of EL students, which most likely, that's an increasing number that happens. The expenses, the 2.5% increase in wage scale. If you could just expand a little bit on that. I know we've done a lot of work as a district to, with our contracts and making those, I want to say better. I'm just going to say better. Making those better for our staff members. Is the 2.5% increase in wage scale, can you expand on that a little bit more? Is that typically what we've seen in the past? You also said for insurance. Is that a typical that 5%, are those increases typical, historically typical? Or have you buffered them in because of the work that we've most recently done in making our contracts, for lack of better terms, better?
So again, I have to start somewhere. So I'm just going to assume with 2.5%, which I think, if you look across many industries, 2.5% is not unreasonable. We want to stay competitive. I'm just starting with 2.5%, but every collective bargaining agreement is different. You've seen some of our paraprofessionals that we've given them increases that were significantly more than 2.5% because we're trying to meet market needs. We'll do the same as we work on the future contracts. But I have to put something in here. So I'm using 2.5%. I think those were the parameters that this board set the last time we did that, 2.5%. As you recall, when you compound that over 2 years, it's 7.5%. So that was kind of our target as we were working on contracts this year. But again, it's all a bargaining process, and we take into account many, many different factors. I don't know if, Emily, you want to expand on that?
Thank you, Executive Director Frederickson, Director Bullion, members of the board. I think just expanding upon that is just bringing back to the fact that not only are all of our contracts different, but some of them have steps included in their salary schedule, which makes it difficult to compare contracts across the board. But we do compare like contracts with our surrounding districts to make sure that we're remaining competitive in our markets with our comparisons. And in terms of the question for the health insurance, over the last 11 years, we've been averaging close to a 4% increase, but we have been way outside the industry norm on that. That's been, we have been able to keep our cost down significantly, thanks to help of our insurance committee and all of our members that are on our plan, making sure they're being wise consumers with our plan. I do not think that it is unreasonable to anticipate that it'll be closer to 5% as the number of vendors in that area dwindle and the cost of health insurance and prescriptions continue to rise. We will continue to do our best to keep those increases where we can keep them. If 5% is where we can meet, I think that'd be great in comparison to what most of our neighboring districts are seeing, closer to the 12 to 15%.
Thank you. And, you know, the correlation between our student success is closely related to our teachers and our staff. So making sure that they're supported and taken care of, I think that I appreciate I just appreciate the assumptions, and I mean, they are our biggest resource for student achievement is our teachers. So it's important that we are, you know, budgeting or forecasting to be able to support keeping them. So thank you.
I've got a question. It's a two-parter. I'm on page 109 for those of you who have a printout. When you're talking about the analysis, one particular sentence just kind of broke my heart. Continuing to pay for programs that will have to be considered for elimination will use valuable reserves despite the future benefits of those programs being eventually lost. I had to read that sentence 3 times. And it broke my heart a little bit more every time I read it. Can you give me my first part of the question? When we're looking at those examples, potentially, when do we start looking at those? Do we come back potentially right away in December here and start looking? Sorry, 3-parter, and do those potential cuts happen yet this school year? And then related to that, last week, the district put out, due to some of the questions that, you know, we were getting on the levy and things, you know, wanted to see some examples of things and put some dollars behind it, which was good. What was the process in kind of determining those, knowing full well that it's not exact or official? I know that. So can you maybe elaborate just a little bit? And I know you don't have all of that paperwork in front of you, I know that, but elaborate a little bit on how those numbers came to be, because I think when I read this sentence, that has a lot to do with that.
Director Olsted, if I...
Should I repeat? It was like a four-parter.
Start with the response. So first and foremost, when you read that sentence in the conclusion or the summary, similar to what we've been sharing in the levy presentation, based upon the forecast, if we have to make some tough decisions, and a couple of other board directors alluded to this, there's not like lots of fat around here to say, oh, we're going to cut this very easily.
Yeah.
So we will be making decisions between sometimes what's good for our students and what's good for our students. There's not a lot that we do that we say this is really horrible for our students and continue to do it. So that's the spirit behind that language here, that we're choosing, we're a little bit between a rock and a hard place. When we have to make reductions, whether it's programmatic reductions or staff reductions, I think this is the second part of your question, that would be built into our budget development that we'd be bringing to the board for next spring. So as we forecast, if we need to cut $4 million from our budget again for next year, our team is already beginning that work right now, analyzing our budgets, looking at outcomes and returns on the investments that are being made, and saying, okay, if we have to cut 4, where will this come from? And our premise is trying to keep the reductions as far away from our students as we possibly can, knowing that ultimately everything funnels into our classrooms. So I think that gets to the second part of your question. Last Friday, when we shared examples of how investments could be made if the levy were to pass, I'll preface similar to what Executive Director Frederickson said. Those were just examples. None of that was set in stone. I want to be very clear with our community. That was not a budget, as some might allude to declaring. These are in response to our engagement with the community to say, what would that possibly look like? What could that look like? And I'm also mindful that we've shared the fact that we would entertain a committee of sorts, similar to our other committees, that would help develop that. So we don't want to get too far ahead to say, oh, we just want a rubber stamp, because we don't. We want feedback and opinion on what that would look like. So our process for either making some investments or making some reductions starts now. Yes, as an administrative team, we've gone through these exercises multiple times throughout our career. We build budgets every year. We modify and adjust those. So we have an idea of some things that we think are high value. Obviously, we have to protect literacy. If we're going to make cuts, that would be an area where we wouldn't be making deep cuts because of the new laws on the books. So we would have to look elsewhere of other aspects. Could be some other learning pathways, et cetera. So right now, we are in this thinking phase, and we would engage our community with us on that thinking phase to help develop some final approaches that we would have iterations coming to you all like we do every single year up until the spring, where we have a preliminary budget that you take a look at, and then we have our final budget with you in June. So that's the process and kind of timeline when those impacts would occur. So for fiscal '25 is where that would be realized.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for pulling this together, the 5-year forecast. It's very helpful.
Tammy, I was on the board in 2020 when we cut the budget quite a bit, actually. And if it wasn't for the federal dollars coming in for COVID, we were scheduled to go into another round. Then we bought some time, and we cut the budget again last year quite significantly. And so far from what I can tell, your projections, haven't really changed. With inflation, they've actually gotten slightly worse, and of course, the mandates didn't help either from the funding that we did receive. I do want to qualify something, though. When does our levy expire? Is it 2027, 28, I believe? The current one?
Then you would see, yep,
Right, okay. All right, and I just wanted to clarify that in the numbers here for when you see that drop then going into the next year. And that with nothing, and we don't have a scenario here where the levy isn't renewed. If, I'm trying to find that.
We do.
We do, okay. The very first, sorry, I was looking past that. And that's where you see the really significant change of, into statutory operating debt fairly quickly after that drop off from 2028 into 2029. Okay. When you, and I appreciate the fact that we have to start thinking about this fairly quickly about what we're going to do, but we are going into potentially how many dollars of budget cuts if the levy doesn't pass again? What we're looking at?
about 3.8 to 4 million,
Okay.
just to keep us at where we are now.
Basically to tread water
Yes.
going into the following school year. Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything else. Does anybody else have any comments? Okay, so the next item on the agenda is annual class size, and again, no board action is requested. And I'm going to hand this over to Executive Director Frederickson and Director Herman.
Thank you, Chair Franz, members of the board, Superintendent Thomas. We are bringing forward today the annual class size averages that we bring each year, adding in the middle school and secondary levels. So you can see on the first slide, we have the elementary size averages across the entire system. So you can see through the system, the total number of kindergarten through fifth grade students that we have, the overall number of sections we have in the system, that would average out to overall class sizes. The reason why we include this is that it's part of the story that our students don't come to us in perfect numbers and boundaries. They come to us kind of all over the place. So as we try to look at our targets and our discussions cap, as we highlighted it earlier in the board meeting today, we're looking at trying to have consistency throughout our system, but because our students do not come to us in perfect packages of 20 or 22, we do see variations throughout the system. So when you go to the next slide, you can see for the elementary class size averages by school, we have our target and our discussion cap, and then the sections that are in red are the ones that are at discussion cap or over, and any of the schools that received the additional student support para due to those overages are have an asterisk in their title. So as Principal Frederickson noted, through the collaboration with the business office, the LAI department, elementary principals and human resources over the summer, tracking this every single week, using the assigned fund balance for this exact purpose. We monitor these numbers really closely and figured out where in the time of the year it would be best to utilize those resources. And you can see, looking at the different schools, there's a range from what the averages are in each of those grades compared to what the overall district average, if we looked at it as a district in totality, to see how that looks quite differently when you actually look at it based off of the schools. If you go to the next slide, you can see the secondary core subject class size averages in the middle school and then also in the high school. And I'll have Dr. Edwards speak to once we in the business office and in human resources, we budget and we staff around averages and then provide those FTE to the building principals and departments to then look at the individual student needs, because we look at system overall, school and subject matter overall, and then the principals with their teams really go down even deeper to look at the student needs.
So yeah, I will pick up there and talk a little bit about, go back to the elementary for just a moment and talk a little bit about that adjustment of needs. Certainly work with the principals. They work with their respective teams at their sites when making class lists, for example. and identifying what the needs are. So when you see a number, for example, in elementary, and you see a number, an average class size of, I'll just pick on a topic for the moment, of 24.67 at Five Hawks. And at each of our sites, we do have some center-based special education programs where students spend differing amounts of time in their core classroom with their regular education teacher, and significant amounts of time outside of that space. So at each site level, our principals are working with our regular education team, our special education team, to make the necessary accommodations to make that work. Certainly, there are limitations around that, and with our tight financial resources, as we spoke of earlier tonight, the importance of optimizing the resources we do have available, not only within a given site, but also across our elementaries. Similarly, when we look at the secondary numbers, I want to just speak a little bit about the differentiation within the secondary level. When we look at our 6th through 8 levels, 6th through 8th grade levels, you'll see pretty consistent level of class size averages there noted. And what they're, again, working with our administration at the secondary level, specifically in this case at the middle school level, to look at when students' course selections come in, they generally are following a very similar pattern of courses. They all take, for example, an English class, a math class, a science class, and a social studies class. They all have a Phy-Ed class or a health class in the 6th and 7th grade. As they progress through the system, they have some electives that they have some choice out. You see noticed there, mentioned at the bottom, that we do have a little bit more variation in those electives. Then when you get to the 9th through 12th grade, similarly, we have most of our 9th and 10th graders in a similar series of courses, once again including the English, math, science, and social studies, as well as a Phy-Ed and health, and then multiple electives that increase as they move through our system and their flexibility in their schedule. So when we report that 9 through 12, I just want to make note that at our 9th and 10th grade level, our class size average is higher because we have all of our students taking, and I'll use science as probably the most concrete example to give, that all of our 9th and 10th graders are either in their Science 9 physical science class, or they're in their biology life science, which is a AP biology or a biology course at the 10th grade level. The class size averages there are slightly higher because they're all grouped together in one of those two courses. But as they progress through the system, specifically in the area of sciences, students do need to take a third year of science sometime in their junior or senior year. And many of our students take both a science in their 11th and 12th grade year. But the variation grows significantly in terms of the types of courses that they have access to. They might have access to 3 or 4 courses as a junior, or 4 or 5 courses as a senior. And when we look at the aggregate of those students, when we spread them out, the class sizes change significantly in that if we have, for concrete numbers, if we have 45 or 50 students that want a particular course at the senior level, that's going to be 2 sections of students generally, and that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 22 to 25 students. That brings down the overall number for the science class size average. But again, we believe that providing that variation and those opportunities to expand and maybe bring greater focus to a particular area or passion that they might have as they get into that junior and senior year and preparing for what's beyond Prior Lake High School, we want to provide, to the extent possible, those types of opportunities. So just wanted to explain that variation a little bit at the secondary level for your benefit, that the numbers, when we boil it down to a number or a series of numbers, doesn't always tell the whole story of the variation that exists. So I wanted to make a point of emphasis there. I think, next slide, I think that was it? Yep. Tammy or Emily to add? Like, at this point, we would open to questions and further conversation.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I just have a comment. I know that, there's got to be data behind this raw data that allows you to come up with an average. And I mentioned in our study session that I thought it would be helpful as a board director and for our community, to be able to see every single classroom in our district and what the actual data is that rolls up to the averages. Because there's a lot of, I hear as a board director, I hear a lot of comments of, oh, this class has this many, and this kindergarten has this many, and it's probably one of the most, as we hear, I think we can all attest, it's one of the most talked about things, is everybody wants small class sizes. And when you get to an average, you could have a 15, and a 25, and you do the average, and you're gonna be right in the middle. But that's not the true picture, and that's where I think a lot of the passion lies behind. And I'm not saying that that's an actual scenario, but my question is, and I asked for this in the study session, is can we as a board have the actual data that shows what every single class size is? Because I know we report it, and you use it to get to this average. And I think it'd be really helpful to be able to have a clear picture, especially when you get to the high school level, of what those real class sizes are. And that was my desire when I requested this at a study session, was to be able to have a really transparent conversation about what our actual class sizes are. And I can tell you from going to conferences last week, the information I'm seeing here is different from what I heard at conferences as well, so.
Director Atkinson, members of the board, I can speak from the HR perspective. We don't have individual class rosters when we're doing our staffing. We look at the overall enrollments and our FTE to come to these averages. So this is the data that we utilize when we're doing our staffing. We don't have access to each of the individual rosters at the elementary level. So that, again, is what we provide the FTE based off of the enrollment numbers, the targets and discussion caps within the budget, and then those FTE go to the site level to determine the needs. In terms of the pulling all that data from the system, we would also need to be very specific on the students that are assigned to the class, as Director Edwards was speaking to. Individuals that are assigned that are center-based students versus resources versus EL and general education students. There's a lot of data behind all that information, but just want to speak to it from the HR perspective. Also, from my knowledge of all the reports that go to the state, we do report on averages that we are reporting here. I'm not aware of any report where we reported all individual class rosters. And the new requirement that came out, we still haven't gotten any information or data of how they're going to be collecting that. We just know from historical standpoints, we've only ever reported out averages. We haven't reported every single course listing with every single class roster in it to date. TBD on what they're going to be requesting of us moving forward. We don't have that information yet.
But you do have the data as far as how many kids we have in each classroom.
From system-wide data, HR has access to the overall enrollment in the grade levels, and then the FTE. So then we take that to divide that out to find the averages.
No, I understand that, but I didn't ask that correctly. I apologize. Someone in our district has actual how many students are in each classroom. Is that correct? Someone has to have that data.
Yes, that data is certainly available, and what is not available is the explanation behind, as Director Herman was referring to, the information about the specific classroom and what the needs within that classroom, specifically speaking at the elementary level. And as I acknowledged earlier in my discussion about the secondary level, there is variation, and certainly that is what results in the averages as they are presented. But once again, as Director Herman shared, the averages are what our reporting has been.
Yeah, and our principals, if I may, Director Atkinson and board, our principals have, obviously they get the FTE allocated to their schools, and then with their site leadership teams, they, in their class rosters based upon live enrollment, they make these determinations as to how many sections of each grade that they'll have, and they can also sometimes swap grades based upon the enrollment. They can also have split grades. That has happened. So the nuances are fairly prevalent. So yes, our principals do have class rosters of every student enrolled in their school by section. And I will tell you, as a board, the fluidity of that data and the reason why you're seeing aggregate data, it's more stable to make decisions from the governance standpoint. Our enrollment changes daily. A student comes in, students go out. What we share with you today, if we are at a classroom section, could look and will look different tomorrow because we have ebb and flows every day. So I would just share that, as I shared before. Yes, the data is there at a programming level, but from a staffing, budget, and governance level, averages are stable to be able to make our, plan for our budgets and forecasts. So if there are questions, and if it's the will of the board to have that granular data, then we can pull class sizes from our our class sections from our principals, and just make sure we're very crystal clear on that cut date. That was the enrollment. But we will not be able to explain the nuance in the context around the support structures within every single classroom, that the average parent or community member looking at this will say, what in the world is with this variance, and not understand the context and the story, nor will many folks engage in that. They'll look at sheer numbers. And so just want to share there's caution in that, because that data without context is not good. So again, I'll defer to the will of the board if you want to go extremely granular in a report such as that, but I would just want to make sure that context and cut times are explicitly clear.
Okay, so years ago, we used to receive K through 5, number of sections, number of kids in each section. But again, the breakout between different special ed categories, et cetera, that could not be done, and that also isn't given to us at the state level for various reasons, discrimination reasons, you name it. But that's as far as it ever went. As far as middle school and high school, or the high school classes, we were receiving average class sizes, and I would agree that an average, by definition, 50% or higher and 50% or lower. But what I do like is the fact that one thing that we have been asking for some time is not to give us an aggregate of those class sizes, but to give us just of the core classes, because of course the electives are going to range all over the place, and that is typical. In other words, a woods or an automotive class can only handle so many kids in there, so it's going to bring the average down and therefore dilute and also misrepresent what's going on in a 9th grade physics course. And so that is the fact that we have core class sizes, even though they're averages. I want to, again, emphasize that an average is by definition right in the middle there. And it is going to vary. However, I personally did like when we received the K through 5, broken down by number of sections in the schools, because it gave us a better idea of capacity of each of those schools. Understanding that the classes themselves, in order to add another classroom, in order to reduce class sizes, that is incredibly expensive from a staffing perspective, space perspective, et cetera, but it did help to put that into perspective.
Is that an ask of an update from the entire board regarding slide 3, where we list, for example, the average class size? I'll just take the first cell of Loyola Del Lago at 20.25, knowing the number of sections associated with that number. Is that what I'm hearing in that?
Let me just qualify. We used to get the actual class numbers by section, so number of sections and then the classes in each section. But I'm only speaking for myself. I would ask the rest of the board to basically give their opinion.
I'll weigh in that that is not data that I feel I need to be a solid board director. I don't feel that digging down into an actual singular classroom in a building, unless something, was rising, unless we were getting community pushback that, 5 Hawks classes are way too big and we're, and the board's hearing about it and there's an uproar in the community. The role of the board is to let administration do their job and partner with their teachers in their buildings to solve a problem to best educate their students. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 hotspots. That's what the math is telling us. That's pretty good math. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some 5 Hawks kindergarten teachers that, are feeling that. And conversely, I would be surprised to hear from a Glendale parent or teacher that their class sizes were too large, right? That's what the math is telling us logically. So I'm comfortable with that as a board director in my role, not an administrator.
Anybody else?
I would agree. I think that just going off what you said, Dr. Thomas, a snapshot may not serve the purpose we're looking for in that, with the many factors that go into class numbers. I'm comfortable with the information given the ebb and flow of the dynamics. I think knowing the snapshot would be more into managerial and not governance. And so therefore it's not information I need.
Yeah, I agree. I don't need the information either. I know the information is out there, and I know our administrators watch it very closely. I know we've had hotspots before. We've been on the board. We've had 3rd graders come speak to us and tell us that their class sizes are too large. And I know that administration jumped in and fixed those areas. So I know the information's out there, and I'm going to rely on administration we don't need all that data. The community does not need to jump to conclusions when they see certain things.
Maybe one more comment I'd make on that is if a community member is having issues in their classroom, concerns about, if the class sizes are too high, my hope is that they would go to the teacher and then work with the teacher and then if their concerns are not met with their individual student, that they would then, take that opportunity to go and speak with their principal. I think, however we can encourage our parents and our community, our parents specifically of the children, of our students to, communicate directly with their teachers. And then if the concerns aren't met, that they communicate with their principals. I think having that open, having that communication at the levels at which change can be made is most important. And that's what fosters trust, and that's what we're looking for. So that would be my encouragement to community members, parents of students, is to communicate their concerns first with teachers and their school principals.
I think I don't need that information now. I'm going to caveat that with, I could change my mind in another couple of months when we're looking at, either, making cuts or adding, especially when it comes to the paras. I've heard stuff too, and I know that, different grades have different numbers of kids. I'm looking at this chart right here. It's a big 5th grade class, kind of spread out across the board. And that's just a bigger 5th grade class than a 3rd grade class or 1st graders, things like that. So I guess I don't need I appreciate the request for the information. I don't need it now, with the caveat that I might be interested in that data in another couple of months to make some decisions. I did actually have a question about the paras, if I may, since I mentioned that, with the schools that have the asterisks. I'm looking at Five Hawks, Hamilton, Red Tail, and Jeffers. Now, Hamilton has one kind of red square, and so does Red Tail, but Five Hawks and Jeffers has a couple. So do these paras go between the grades? Are there paras dedicated to, like for Five Hawks, for example, dedicated to kindergarten and a person dedicated to second grade? Do they kind of go back and forth? Does it depend on the day? I just had that question when it came to the paras.
Director Olsted, members of the board, each of those schools received one student support paraprofessional.
Okay.
That was based off of the assigned fund balance that was approved in the budget set aside to address class sizes. And as Principal Frederickson referred to earlier in the meeting, the changes that we received based off of the resources that we had available, we had additional needs than what our resources could fit. So we were able to make that exchange to get one more, but we did not have the resources to get two support paras for Five Hawks and two support paras for JP. So each of those buildings received one, and then the principal, along with the dean and the learning teams in those areas, have best determined how to utilize those resources throughout the day. And that more than likely will ebb and flow throughout the school year as kindergartners learn their routines, as second graders go through testings, as different things are happening. The building principal, along with the learning teams, will be working through those plans and how to best utilize those supports.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Let's move on to our next topic, which is the superintendent goals.
Thank you, Chair Franz. What you all see here tonight is a finalized version of what you all saw 2 weeks ago. Again, fixed a lot of the formatting. Everything stayed the same. The progress indicators have a couple of other sub-focuses throughout those areas, but everything else has remained the same. Reprioritize things to align with our strat plan with academic excellence first versus outlining the MSBA order. But other than that, everything else has remained the same. So if you have any questions, just I stand ready for questions.
So first I'm going to take a motion in a second
So made.
by Director Boyan,
Second.
second by Director Olstad. Any questions for Dr. Thomas?
I just have one question. When we're talking about the budget under school district finances, I see a lot of stuff about budget development, and the question I have is more about around budget maintenance. And my question is just like we saw this year where we got to the end of the year and we're overspent by $7 million. How do we as a board receive updates throughout the year when we are getting, how do you, I guess I'm trying to understand, like, as an administrator, do you look at it 3 months in and go, oh my gosh, we're $1 million over already, we got to stop the spending? I mean, what type of parameters are in place so that we don't go $7 million over? And I think I said this.
$7 million over. Remember, it's that you said, when we were talking earlier, it's the net against the expenditures and revenue. So it's not 7 million. We shared that earlier this evening.
I think the expenses came in 7 million over, was my understanding.
The expenditures and revenue balance, I think the net was around, Tammy was at around 4. So again,
But that's,
we can
okay.
walk.
But 4 and 7 are different, right? We could agree on that. That
Yeah,
7 and
because
4
our
are
budget
not-
was
Right, so-
116 and we ended at 1, whatever the
Right.
number is. So to me, that's 7.
We began looking at, Yeah, you have to balance the revenue side that came in on the sped and other aspects that we just walked through a little bit ago,
We
but.
got more revenue in other words.
Right, but
So-
either way, the question, what I'm hearing is.
I just want to know, like, when you hit your budget, you hit your budget. There's no more spending.
And
Kinda, you know.
and we do have freezes. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and
I was just
I
gonna
guess,
say, you don't get, I mean, I would love Director Chuka to come up here and share with us. We don't get to just stop spending on students when
No, I
there are
understand that.
needs. It would be great for her to explain that, though. I know I hate to call her on this, but when students come to us and we don't know their needs, we don't get to say, we're sorry.
Right.
well, this isn't all driven by students, though. And so I guess my question is we sit here at this board table every month, and we ask questions of, is this in the budget? And the answer we get back is, yes, this is in the budget. I never, ever once did I hear, nope, this is, okay, maybe I'm, never's not a good word. This isn't in the budget, we're now going 1 million over, or 2 million, or 3 million, or 4 million. So when I just look at maintenance, like, to me, that's maintenance. How do you ensure that we do hit our budgets that we put in place, so
Well-
that there's no surprises?
Yeah, so, sorry.
No, that's it. I
So,
mean-
so I think the regular monitoring of our financials, our monthly financials, which is something that I've put into here. Also, we as an administrative team, we will come back to you all in December, and if we have to make an amendment to the budget, that's one official point in time that we actually do that. And then we look at our forecast for next year as we begin the formal budgeting process, let's say around January-ish or so, and we'll start to say, are there expenditures, based upon what we can see with projections, because as we've all talked, we are projecting and making assumptions. If some of those assumptions don't come true, or if some of the assumptions come in higher than what we assumed, then we begin to figure out where can we begin to scale back some of our expenditures. Some of them are fixed, so if students come in requiring supports, we have to deliver that, particularly if they're receiving special ed support. We might have contracts that we can begin to scale back or not engage, or we cut our purchasing costs down. We try to get more fickle with printing costs, or those kind of things, variables that we can control. So that's how we'll begin to monitor and manage against the budget, kind of like the second half of the year. But our monthly financial report to you also is what we try to share each month, so you can kind of see for yourselves where the money is going and where we're spending juxtaposed to the budget. And that's laid out every single month, so.
Yeah, and I do remember seeing that, and early on, I'd called out that we were over by 2 or 3 million, and the answer I remember hearing was, we're watching it very closely. So that's why I was surprised that we went over. The other thing I have a question about is the one point that says superintendent will bring forth a structurally balanced budget to the board for fiscally '25. Can you just elaborate on that? I know we've had
Yeah.
some conversations about that, but I think it's important for the
Yeah,
community
I
to
think,
hear
I think the
that.
target here is to basically find ways to bring forth a budget to the board without using fund balance to balance revenue. That has been a practice that we've been engaging in for many years. And again, the goal is to try to bring a structurally balanced, and to doing that, for example, last year, we, I think since 19, we've been using about $1 million every single year to offset the expenditures to bring revenue in, because our enrollment has been flat. We don't control, kids, as well as some of the state mandates we don't control. So to bring forth a structurally balanced budget is to not use fund balance, and that is to make deeper cuts. So the goal around that is to try to match revenue to expenditures, and just know with that as a target goal, deeper cuts will be on the table for discussion to make that happen.
I also want to point out that even last year, actually the first year and a half that Director Frederickson was in, she started producing in our board packets the monthly highlights that shows all the variations, summaries, and differentials that occur. And so the board does get that every month. It is incredibly thorough. We have more data than we ever had before, and I am proud to say we have had pretty much no surprises. of those that have occurred, we've had more than a month or two of notice. For instance, busing contract, we found out 2 to 3 months in advance that that was going to increase significantly. There were other increases and other changes that were not expected that were forewarned to the board at least, I think, 2 study sessions at least in advance. So that, as far as I'm concerned, there have been no surprises. There haven't been good surprises all the time, but there has been no surprises by the definition of surprise.
I would agree with that.
Are there any other questions on the superintendent goals?
I have one other question. Could you give an example under, so we're talking about academic excellence, the very first one. Under all schools will include an equity goal to address strategies for greatest learning gaps among students, what that would look like?
Every school will take a look at their student populations and see where there might be discrepancies on demographics of students as outlined by the world's best workforce. It's termed something new, but by law and by statute, we have to disaggregate our data and set achievement goals so that all students are achieving. So if I see that there's, our students receiving special education are not meeting anticipated growth, what are the resource supports and strategies that a school is putting in place to ensure that they actually make the predicted growth that they should make? So that would be an example of how we look at various subgroups as outlined by the world's best workforce. And forgive me, I can't remember what
That's okay.
the new acronym is
I
now.
understand, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay, and I had just one question. We're going to be using the same one for the mid-year as we do for the end of year. Okay, good. With no other questions, and we already have a motion and a second, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 6-0. All right, next item is the board committee assignments. We had 3 open committee assignments due to the resignation of Board Director Velazquez, the Policy Advisory Committee, the SEEK Committee, and then the Southwest Metro. For the Policy Committee, I was second to Enrique. So I'm suggesting that we memorialize that I take the one last meeting, I believe, for the year. On that one, for the SEEK Committee, I met with incoming Board Director White and asked him if he would take that seat, that we only have 1 meeting left for that in December. And then for the Southwest Metro, Director Olstad was also second to Enrique on that committee, and she did attend already once. And I believe there's 2 meetings left, or 1, the rest of the year.
Yes, and Finance Committee as well for Southwest Metro, which he also sat on.
So 2 meetings and a Finance Committee left?
Yes.
Okay, so that's 3.
Could be 2.
Could be 2. I didn't think they met in December, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm suggesting that Policy Committee, until we have the next organizational committee, that I resume the position on that committee. And then for the SEEK Committee, Director White, and for the Southwest Metro, Director Olstad maintains her seat on that committee through, again, the organizational meeting in January, and then per normal cadence in December, after the election, the committees will go out to each individual board member and ask them to choose which ones they would like to be on for the next year. So I need a.
Can I just, can I ask a question? Or you want to make your
I
motion
was
first?
going to do a motion in a second and then start the discussion.
Okay, that's fine.
So made.
Okay, for Director Olstad?
Second.
And second for Burnick. Okay, discussion?
Yeah, I'm just curious, why wouldn't Director Dan White just fill in the positions that and Director Velazquez fell off of? He's an experienced board member, and I understand you have the authority as the board chair, but it seems kind of ironic that you would appoint yourself to the policy committee. So I have no problem with Director Dan White, if he's available to do that. I actually found this whole conversation around the committees, the timing of it was kind of odd, and I was kind of hoping that this would come when he's on the board, so he could be part of the conversation. So I'm just asking, why wouldn't he just fill in the spots of, that's kind of what I thought would happen, that he would just fill in, because he is taking Enrique's seat, Director Velasquez's seat, so.
Well, let's start with the Southwest Metro, and I think Director Olstad can probably explain this a little bit better. When she started as a second, there is a ramp-up time for that. There's also a consistency for that. Since she was already attending when Enrique couldn't, she would be the natural one.
That one I'm clear on, it's the
Okay.
policy committee.
The policy committee, I was on the policy committee before. I always, I have been a second for Enrique, so I have been submitting and following the policies. And as you note, that we have lots of policies to review. They do extend, so the policy committee had already occurred. And I believe there's one left.
There's one,
Is that
December
correct, Director
12th.
Herman?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
December 12th.
So the policy committee had to be manned by somebody.
Yeah, that's why
yeah.
why wouldn't Director Dan White just take on that? Like you said, he's filling, I'm trying to get an understanding of why he wouldn't be picked versus why you would assign yourself to that committee.
I was on it before, I was Enrique's second, and I've been already submitting information and comments back on the policy during the policy committee in his absence. So that's why, so it just was consistency.
I mean, it's
I can
one
personally
meeting,
support
I mean, I
Well,
personally,
if it doesn't matter, it does matter. It matters to you. We're listening. I just don't think it, I think for consistency, she's been on it before. Let Dan White get up to speed. Thankful that he'll fill in that one other meeting, but I have no problem with Mary, or Board Chair France, filling in that spot for one meeting.
yeah, no, that's fine, I'm just trying to understand why. I was trying to understand the why.
Sometimes things just happen and they just make sense.
Well, I also know the board chair has the authority to appoint, so I don't even know why we're voting on this, because it says in policy you have the authority to appoint, so.
Know about it, we'd be upset too.
We can all attend the meeting, so it doesn't matter. I mean, so at the end of the day, it's sort of procedural, in my opinion, so.
We're just memorializing it until the end of the year, which is really a month and a half away at best.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just wanted to know why. That just seemed, like I said, the one off on that one, so.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm comfortable with it. It's one meeting. Let Director White get up to speed, and everything will move forward with the different roster in January.
January will be here soon.
Okay, are we ready for a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that passes 5-1. And then we have to set an election canvass date. That is the next item.
Yes, Chair France and Board Directors, in talking with Scott County and Martha Walls, they are recommending that we choose November 15th due to the magnitude of this election, giving the county ample time to process everything that they need to. They would be a little leery that they wouldn't be able to get everything done if it was set prior to. So the 15th is the latest, and so they were recommending. So we are recommending to you to give the county ample time and then canvass on the 15th.
So what that means is we would have a special meeting just for the purpose of voting to canvass the election, which is basically to approve the results of the election. That can happen anytime during the day. So I'm just going to throw that date out there. Is there any, we need a quorum, that's the first requirement, okay? Is there anyone that knows ahead of time that they will not be able to make it out there on the 15th? We're going to be voting on you, so technically. But, okay, so we have 6 members, so.
And that's a Friday.
And it's a Friday, so would we have, is there anybody that can make it out first thing in the morning or noon? Don't want to go too much farther in the day because we do have to publish our results, so.
I would say earlier is better. for me.
Fine with morning.
Yeah.
Morning? Right, and it would be here.
It's when
It
you
would
said
be a
when you
brief
make it
meeting.
short.
It's a
It's like when
very
you make
short
it out,
meeting.
I'm like, oh,
quorum.
where? So
Right.
here, yes. I think we've always done it just in the morning.
Is there anyone here sitting at the table that can't make it on Friday the 15th?
No.
Okay, so we're going to make Friday the 15th in the morning, 7, 8, 9 a.m.?
And Alexa's, I mean, our schedules do change, obviously, but as long as we have 4, we're good, right?
Correct.
So, thank you.
At time,
I'm an early bird myself.
8 a.m.? Good for you, Martha? 8 a.m. on the 15th. Got it. Okay, so we do have to have, do we need to vote on that, Martha, or do we just, okay, so. Okay, so a motion and a second first?
So made.
Okay, Bullion and Burnick, the two Bs. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 6-0. There's no policies at that time, so we're going to move on to administrative reports.
All right, thank you, Chair France. I got a few. Earlier this evening, we had a couple of our staff be recognized for their retirement, and I just want to say congratulations and thank you to Robin Schmitz, health aide at Westwood, for 20 years of dedication to serving our community, and Carla Schutz, kindergarten teacher, Glendale, 27 years of amazing support for our youngest of, some of our youngest of learners. So thank you to both of you, and thank your families for loaning us your time for so long. Just a couple of highlights. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Changemaker Hub with several districts in the metro area with our high school students to help. They were visioning what high school could be, and to really hear from our students how the rote nature of school really needs to be thought about and considered differently moving forward. And I'm excited and inspired that our students are bringing their voice to the table to talk about what they would envision for their learning needs to be met. So just want to say a big thank you to our students for speaking your truths and really pushing our thinking as adults and decision makers for how we can make school more responsive and relevant. Also want to just thank our National Honor Society and their support at the blood drive at the high school last week. I was able to convince my wife to give blood for the first time, all because of student pressure. And over the past couple of weeks, we've had a couple of our schools engaging in their ESTEM days with our community partners and going out doing pond samples, plant leaf identifications, et cetera. So a lot of ESTEM learning happening at a couple of our elementary sites. And then just yesterday, a really big shout out to our cheer squad at the high school. They got their sights on nationals, and so there's a great fundraiser that I was able to partake in with them at the VFW. One of you will likely talk about school board scholars, so I'm going to let you all have that one. But I'm just so proud of our students, I'll just say that. And then at homecoming, we got a win on the board, which is great for our team. And also, that was our opportunity to induct new members into the Laker Hall of Fame. And I want to thank the Laker Educational Foundation and other community partners to really bringing that induction back to life. And I'll tell you, it's very meaningful. And I want to just congratulate the following inductees. Sydney Smythe O'Keefe is her maiden name. Tony Doherty, Matt Aarons, Rebecca Radcliffe, and she was accepting on behalf of Chloe. And then we had Chris Fleck, Kyle Woolner, Deb Sunderman, and the highlight of the night was the 1970s football team, 1970 football team, team of distinction. And just a great opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments. And, it's just amazing at what our graduates do in this world. And I was just blown away by some of the stories, and not only for what they've accomplished, but remembering some of the barriers and challenges that they had to overcome to get to where they're at today. And it happened right here in the district. And they still are saying it was the most powerful experience for them to learn through some of those challenges as well. So just really great way to celebrate them. So those are my updates.
Okay. All right, administrative reports.
I just want to quickly say thank you to all of our staff that are working really hard. It's been a lot of dynamics already throughout the school year, and I think a lot of our staff are working really diligently to support not only the needs of our students, but the needs of our community. And just wanted to give them their shout out and ask for everyone who interacts with our staff to just please be kind. They're working really hard. They have a really heavy workload right now. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have available to them. So just please, please treat them with respect and kindness. And they are trying their best and working very, very hard. So just wanted to put that out there in a request to the community and staff for our staff members. Thank you.
We have an upcoming Professional Development Day here on Wednesday, and very excited about the work that we're going to be able to do, launching our OLA training with our Phase 1 REDACT training. It's actually happening. We've been talking about that for quite some time, so launching that. And then primarily at the other levels, mostly 612, but some specialists, non-classroom teachers who aren't part of the REDACT Phase 1 training. There are some staff who are at the elementary level who that applies to. Will be engaged in a variety of professional learning activities on Wednesday, including opportunities for some all-important vertical collaboration within their teams, as well as some additional training related to our new Danielson framework for evaluation, with a focus on the instructional practices domain of that particular framework, which we've spoken about here at the board table on a number of occasions. So looking forward to that learning for opportunity for our staff coming up on Wednesday.
I'd just like to remind everybody that today is Indigenous People Day. We actually had a ceremony here this morning, a smudging ceremony that we want to thank Sam Oak and Freddie, and we had some representatives from our Native community, an elder, and we were able to have a very informative question and answer period, and we really appreciate the time and effort that they devoted to spend a little time with us in our smudging ceremony.
And starting with board reports, this time I'd like to start with Ann, if she's wants to give her report.
Yeah, like Dr. Thomas said before, is it good? Like Dr. Thomas said before, we're all kind of just like settling down from homecoming week. It was really successful and it was really fun. In regards to student council, right now we're like making sure we're thanking everybody, all the staff and all the people that helped us have such a successful homecoming week. We're working on a lot of events that are coming up this month and next month. Our special events committee is working on our No Shave November fundraiser. And our community service committee is kind of collabing with the Junior Optimists on the Halloween party. And we also have honorary elections coming up next week where we elect more members to student council. It's an opportunity for people that didn't get to run in the spring, so I'm excited for that. And I also just want to touch on, again, Indigenous Peoples Day today. We had a presentation earlier this morning, and I just love the work that all of our student advisory group and all of our affinity groups are doing for the school, because I think these things are really helping to educate the students. Even if people aren't really paying attention or anything, at least they know what's going on, at least they are informed. We also had the Latino Hispanic Student Union Bridge Walk last week, which was really fun. They basically set up on the bridge a bunch of like different like fun activities and kind of posters, and educated us on different Latino and Hispanic student like cultural aspects. So yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, board reports.
Thank you. I looked back in my notes because it was brought up in the Southwest Metro meeting. The new name for World's Best Workforce, Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness. So now we know world's best workforce rolls off the tongue, just a little easier though, in my opinion. Let's see, we had.
We will be asking you again for that.
Write it on a Post-it note. So we had our first equity advisory meeting of the year 2 weeks ago. And we are very excited. We have branched off into smaller ad hoc committees, like 2-3 people committees to do some work on that committee. And the one that I'm on is our Connected Conversations. And so our first one of the school year is November 7th at Shepherd of the Lake Church. And we will be discussing housing instability. So really excited about that. There's going to be some people from our district, people from Scott County, and people from Shepherd of the Lake, actually. So November 7th is that. Really looking forward to that. We also had our first Teaching and Learning Advisory Committee meeting of the school year. And we have some new members there. And so we reviewed our charter, as well as Dr. Edwards stepped in and did a levy presentation, which I think was really good. And we had a really good discussion on that as well. Southwest Metro, as Mary mentioned, I have been to another meeting with our new, Southwest Metro's new superintendent, Dr. Horton, who's fabulous. He's finishing up a listening tour as a new superintendent, and so now it kind of moves into a comprehensive review of the district. And so he's really taking, very similar, I would say, to what you did, Dr. Thomas, when you came aboard. He's kind of taking a lot of the similar paths, so I really look forward to that. And selfishly, I really enjoy sitting on that board. For the short time I've done it so far, but it's really great to just see how other districts function, as well as hear from other member districts and what's shaken in their district, and it's just really, it's really powerful. The one other thing I'll say too, MSHSL, there is a vote for the member districts in MSHSL to bring on ninth grade into the MSHSL. Believe it or not, for those who don't know, ninth grade hasn't been under the umbrella of MSHSL. The biggest piece that is very important to this is the catastrophic insurance that comes with bringing ninth graders under that umbrella. And so our district was given a ballot to vote on this, and the vote closes on Friday, so it's not done yet. All signs, I think I'm okay with saying all signs point to yes, ninth grade will be under the umbrella, but wanted to bring that out as well. And then finally, we have some kids leaving for DC tomorrow morning, so we wish them safe travels.
Awesome.
Did they get to go last year?
Yes,
They did.
it was the year
It was the year before
that they,
Okay.
The 2 years before that, I think,
Yeah.
that they didn't, yeah.
yeah. So it's exciting.
Awesome. We had a finance committee meeting 2 weeks ago, mostly talked about reviewed finance policy. So that'll be coming to the board in, I'm not sure exactly when we talked about it then, but it escapes my mind.
The October work session.
Thank you. Soon. We have a really great group of community members on that committee who have extensive financial background. And every time I'm in that meeting and hearing them ask the questions they're asking about specific accounting practices, and some members even have background in education finance. So I think that's really helpful in that room and helpful in our community in understanding the complexities. And selfishly, I'm going to give a personal retirement shout out to Mrs. Schutz, who had all 3 of my kids, which not many teachers in the district have had. I'm surprised it didn't force her to retire sooner. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I wish her the best. And I'm very thankful to all her years of service, not just to my kids.
Yeah, so we've had our policy committee meeting was on the 10th, and I will kind of echo your comments regarding the community members in it. We always have such great conversations. The policy experience that's on that committee is really, I love being on that committee and learning from them. And also, they brought forward from the finance committee the policies that you guys discussed. So I think it's wonderful, the layers, you know, given the board's scope of policy work, it is one of our biggest jobs, and having those layers, I just really appreciate that. ECFE had their 50th year celebration, and Minnesota is the only state that has ECFE, which I think is so cool. We talked about that a little bit last school year when I first learned about that. The next Early Learning Advisory Council meeting, it takes place October 24th from 12:30 to 1:30 at Edgewood. And there's always room for more community members that are interested in getting involved with that. On October 1st, it was a wonderful day being able to shake the hands and congratulate all of the board scholars. We have so many bright students in our district. It was a pleasure to be able to shake hands and congratulate so many of them. The last thing is Strive Mentoring is beginning October 24th. We had our kickoff meeting this past week, and that is for the Bridges ALC students. Last year was my first year participating in Strive, and I hope that I participate in that until they kick me out. It is wonderful. I love it so much. At the kickoff meeting, one of the other mentors said, I don't know if we're the ones we're the ones teaching, or if they're teaching us, and I think it is a wonderful combination of both. It is a wonderful opportunity to be able to learn from our students. And MEA's coming up. Have a great MEA break. That's all I got.
Yeah, thank you. On September 19th, which seems like a lifetime ago, I attended the Community Education Advisory Committee meeting, and we received a levy update by Dr. Thomas. And a couple notes that I have here is that very encouraging that our kids co-enrollment is growing. In fact, we have 30-plus school-age children on the wait list, so that's very exciting. They're also the community education, business model, whatever, is very healthy. They have a healthy fund balance, as we saw today, and just overall things are just going really well there. A couple of things to note. We are looking for members to join the Community Education Advisory Committee. So if you're interested, you can apply, I believe, online. And then next thing up, right following this weekend, we have our Halloween Bash on October 19th at the middle school, which is a very fun event if you have littles in the district to come on over and enjoy the Halloween Bash. So that's all. Thank you. Okay, other than policy committees and other committees that have already been mentioned, we had Career Day last week at the high school. That was a blast. I was able to go for most of the day. And at that same time, they were doing the Hispanic celebration on the bridge, and I was able to catch some candy on the way out since I skipped lunch, so that was very important to me. But it was a blast to come and speak to some of the students there during the break. As was mentioned, Bridges Strive Mentoring has begun. The kickoff meeting was last week, or the orientation, I should say, and that the mentoring will start at the end of this month. This will be my 6th year mentoring in Strive, and as Director Bullion stated, it is an incredible experience. I still keep in contact with nearly all the students that I mentored and still work with them, and they're incredible people. We also had a scale meeting I did not attend, but the presentation is out there. And one of the things that happened during the scale meeting is Belle Plaine did review their results of using the new CPM math curriculum in their third year, and it was very successful for them. So the principal came and discussed that. And then also MinCaps mentoring has started. That'll be my 8th year mentoring with MinCaps. And they are still looking for mentors. I believe they are still 10 or 11 short. So if you're interested in signing up to mentor in the business, the trades, or the healthcare pathways, please contact the MinCaps directors and/or just call the school directly. They are still looking. And with that, I'm going to future events. Of course, this is MEA week. It begins on Wednesday. Our next board study session will be October 28th. And then, of course, don't forget about Election Day. Polls are open between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. And as we stated, we will canvass the election on the 15th at, what time do we say? 8 a.m.? 8 a.m. 8 a.m., bright and early. Okay, and with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
So made.
And a second by Director Crosby, a first by Director Bullion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes 6-0. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.